creation tools. It's like a multi-billion-dollar industry, according to analysts, which I think is really, it's quite fascinating. But anyway, we'll blast through that pretty quick, and then I'll hand over to Raya, who'll then introduce you guys. Yep.
All right.
Cool.
Let's start the webinar then.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wendy. Okay. I think we're on. Yeah. My assistant might send me a quick message in Slack just to give me the confirmation that we're good to go. Is that okay, Wendy? Just a quick message to let me know we're good to go, yeah. And give me the green light, yeah. Hi, everybody. Not quite sure if we're live yet. I'm Nigel, CEO of Astronaut. Excited to do the opening, but I'm just waiting on the go-ahead message from our technology helper. All right. Here we go. Just getting back. Great. Oh, oh. So Wendy, Intan, if you guys can give me a quick message in Slack or in chat, and then let me know that we're good to go, yeah. Okay. Just checking. Okay, brilliant. Okay, just got the message. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Thanks so much for all of you that have signed up and joined us here today to talk about what is a really interesting topic that is the fundamental. It talks about the fundamental foundation of the industry that we're in, and we'll get into that. Obviously, we're Astronaut, we're the hosts. We've got some fantastic panelists here today. If we can go to the next slide, thanks, Wendy. And we're opening here with a little interesting video. Some of you may see it, but we really like this. So let's have a listen.
So you want your job? What are you do? Me and they have many hunter. Me all together. You hunt together. These days, many men. So, they don't say I have it. Take it more time. Hunter? Maybe get it? Why you leave that truck? That's more time. Me make the jump bigger. How long you with that truck? 10 months. 10 months? Me hear you leave after 2 months. Me hear you leave and go travel around playing with friends. Me too. Me don't try to chase for time. Me just want to play. Me got just see to me. Yeah. Lovely. This house.
All right, guys, just a little bit of humor there, but we're really sending the message here that interviews and CVs have been around for a very long time. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Astronaut obviously is an automated video technology company and doing automating the assessment process as well. However, today we're going to be talking about CVs. So if we can go to the next slide, thanks, Wendy. CVs, really, people have known, and everyone knows that there's problems with CVs. Yeah. This is some data from 2024, I think it is. We'll put the reference in the notes of the recording. But you can see here data from UK employers, and US employers that when surveyed, everyone's very aware that there are problems with CVs. Yep. However, they are still the dominant form of individuals presenting themselves for consideration. So if we can go to the next slide. And also very strong recognition through data that many people getting jobs, or let me put it the other way, many people who are actually lying on CVs are getting jobs as well, because it's very difficult to be able to verify important information on CVs. Yeah, and of course the definition of fraud stuff is something that that can be serious in some contexts and less serious in others. However, the information on CVs is quite fundamental. And I wonder if there's anyone on this webinar today who may have embellished information on their CV or even flat out lied, and you got your current job because of that. Yeah, it's much more common than we believe, because in many cases it's never found out, right? So that's very important to understand as well. Okay, moving forward. Next slide. This was really interesting to understand as well. When we researched for this event today, and this is growing as well. You look at this is the size of the resume building market, right? Now, what's powering the growth of this market is AI tools, right? And so actually, I read something yesterday that was very interesting and related to this as well, because you've got the resume building market growing fast, but you also have the resume screening market growing fast as well. And there was very interesting, and I'll try and find the reference for this and again put it in the notes. But what was being discovered is that AI filtering tools for CVs are giving preference and having a positive bias for CVs that were made or enhanced by AI. So they are preferencing, it seems, their own creations, yeah, which is all happening on top of the actual employment process, yeah, the employment selection process. So anyway, long story short, big market, growing fast. The size of the problem is very real. We can go to the next slide. Of course, biases, and this is just one of the very common examples that exist. And there's a lot of data about biases when it comes to names of different cultures and people getting callbacks. This is actually data from Singapore, and we'll be able to again show the link in the notes for this. But this is a common problem all over the world, right? Now, one of the things that we've done at Astronaut, we have recently released our feature for anonymous screening. So people are now using Astronaut, they can turn the names off and turn off other data when they are reviewing candidates. Yeah, so that's another problem with CVs. Let's move on. Next slide. Okay, and of course, it's for people that have been in the industry for a while and that have had problems with making incorrect selection decisions. People are very aware of the problem. Yeah, they're very aware of the cost, but it is important to look at the data. Yeah, if there is a mishire, you have to rehire, you have to retrain. It's very, very expensive and problematic. So how can we have a better way of actually avoiding these problems and moving forward and moving fast. Next slide. Thanks, Wendy. And so today we have a great moderator. We have Raya, who's the commercial lead at Astronaut. He's going to be moderating today with our two fantastic panelists. He'll introduce them shortly. Raya is based in Jakarta and leads the commercial parts of our business. And so he's the perfect person to be able to host today's session. So over to you, Raya.
All right. Thank you, Nigel, for the introduction. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, CVs Are Dangerous. It's our live talk show exploring one of the most fundamental, yet perhaps most flawed tools in modern hiring. As mentioned by Nigel, my name is Diptraya Ratulangi, but you can just call me Raya. I'm the commercial lead at Astronaut, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. It's actually pretty happy to see familiar faces in the participants, the HR leaders, recruiters, coaches, and probably there are some fresh graduates or students that are joining. And I can see that from the names, it's coming from across Indonesia, not just in the region, but also from Southeast Asia and probably even beyond. So whether you're tuning in via Zoom or YouTube, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Now, for as long as we can remember, CV has been the first handshake between talent and opportunity. It's supposed to represent our skills, our experience, our story, but by the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper that somehow captures who we are and what we're capable of. But here's the questions that we want to raise in the session today. Is the CV still doing its job, or has it become part of the problem? Because if we're being honest, the way we hire hasn't changed as much as the world around us has. As you know, with the technological advancement, we're living in the age of AI-generated resumes. Companies are using algorithmic shortlists and keyword-optimized job applications. Yet we still rely on static document to judge dynamic human potential. And that's what brings us together today. This isn't a talk about that we're against CVs. If anything, this is a talk where we want to explore beyond CVs. We're here to explore what fairness and objectivity really mean in the modern recruitment, and how we can evolve from credentials to capabilities, from experience to potential. Throughout this session, we'll be hearing from remarkable people who have spent years challenging traditional hiring practices, who are building new, more human ways to evaluate talent. So whether you're a recruiter, hiring manager, a career coach, or again, even a job seeker, this conversation will touch you in some way. Because at the end of the day, isn't just about hiring, it's about how we see people. So I would like to introduce you to our brilliant panelists. So we have Chitra Ovani, who's supposed to be here, but I think she's on her way to the hospital because I think she's giving birth any time now. So yeah, it's too bad that she can't join. But just to introduce Chitra Ovani, she's the founder and CEO of Hunt Hire, one of Southeast Asia's leading executive recruitment firms. She's also the Secretary General of APRESI, the Indonesian Association for Executive Search Companies. Chitra believes leadership isn't written on a CV, it's proven under pressure. And the next lineup, which is also someone that I'm lucky to met in person, Dr. Susan Chen, CEO of CoGrow and the author of The Death of Best Practices. She's a global HR leader who's worked with AIG, Visa, and Gojek, and she believes that talent today needs multidimensional evaluation. And of course, last but not least, we have Telmo Martins, a career coach and head of people at Weifak, who's worked across Europe, Middle East, the US, and pretty much across the globe. So he advocates for inclusive, skills-first hiring and helps uncover hidden gem talent often overlooked by traditional processes. So welcome, Susan, and welcome, Telmo. Thank you for making the time to share with us today. I'm pretty sure that people joining will be inspired by our discussion that we're going to have. So there will be three segments. The first one would be the introduction about CVs and their limitations. Segment two, we're going to discuss about how the role of CVs has shifted across contexts. And the last segment would be moving towards better solutions. If you guys have any questions, please do scan the QR code here. I think it will direct you to Slido and just place the questions there, and we'll make sure that all the answers will be all the questions will be answered by the end of our session. All right, to open, let's start with something everyone here can relate to. That moment when a CV seemed perfect, but the real experience didn't match up. So I think I'm gonna throw this with the to Susan and Telmo, but probably ladies first, Telmo, if it's okay. So I'm gonna ask Susan, what's one experience where a CV completely misled you, and what was the real cost of that mistake?
Good question. So I think CVs that has misled me are probably ones that has such um clear numbers and matrices, and that
Right.
makes you feel like, oh, I can really, really get a sense of the ability, right? For example, have led a team of 5 to achieve $10 million in sales. It sounds great, right? And you get
Yeah.
super excited. And then you realize, when you talk to the person, there's so much dynamics around when someone say, I have achieved this, it's actually teamwork, right? When someone achieved 10 million, it should be a team. So
Right.
I think sometimes I forget how the way it's presented is sometimes forget the dynamic of true teamwork and diversity, which are actually all really, really important with regarding to being successful at work as a leader or as a team. So I guess my point is that sometimes I get, I remember these perfect CVs makes them like a perfect candidate, but often they're not perfect team players. They're not perfect team members, not perfect leaders that understand how
Right.
to bring people forward. So, I've started to make sure I think a bit deeper in how either I want to probe them or, look for other signals in their CV.
Right. So just to follow up on that, Susan, so did that experience of, looking at shiny CVs, like, achieve certain numbers, achieve,
Mm.
I mean, it's pretty obvious for sales. It's all about revenue, right? Did that experience of looking at shiny CVs change how you approach first impressions of candidates today?
Oh, absolutely. I try not to look at CVs if I can.
Oh, okay. That's nice. Okay. So, okay.
Right?
So,
I mean, the world is amazing. You can Google people, right? You can look at
right.
LinkedIn, you can Google. There's actually a lot more information about, for those who are on the webinar, there's so much information about us out there. What you see on a CV versus how you Google me, Susan Chen, or Telmo, right? Or Deeptra, it's going to look very different to what's on our CV. So that will be my sense. If I can, I would try other ways to get a more multi-dimensional sense of this candidate. I think in particular for senior roles, right? Obviously, when you look at graduates or a
Right.
bit early career, that looks a little bit different. And we can talk about later. I think there are other ways to capture the essence of this early career selection.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. Now over to Telmo. I think the same question, Telmo. So, what's one experience where CV completely misled you? And what
Yeah.
was the real cost of that mistake?
Yeah, so I can't talk about specific situations, of course, but there has been the two extremes. A well-crafted CV that then it turned out that it was a well-crafted in English and the person could barely speak English, or it was, as Susan mentioned, a lot of kind of I did this, a lot of numbers, a lot of reassurance from just a CV review perspective. That did not turn out that. Then when you actually probe the person in the first recruiter screen, you realize that a lot of this was just a group effort. Their impact is much more reduced than what the CV says. But then I also had the other extremes where there were people with very poor CVs. And bear in mind that I do kind of, I'm a career coach, CV writer on the side. I do that on the weekends. And then my day to day is actually as a head of people, head of recruitment, and I'm reviewing CVs, interviewing people. So for me, seeing a CV that is poor is very hard to show this then to a hiring manager, right? They're like, no, I don't know what you see in this. And then for me to make the case that the person actually might be good, let's just interview him, is quite tough because the first instance is I need to fight the hiring manager for the CV to even go through. But I had instances where that was the case. Very poorly written CV that actually turned out to be one of the best hires. But you have both extremes because we got to this point, and we'll speak a little bit more about that, but we got to this point where we're assessing not the CV, but how well a person drafts a CV, which can
Right.
be also something that a lot of people either blatantly lie about or just don't have the skill for it. And sometimes they outsource to people like me that write CVs on the side, right? So that signal that before was people would go with the written CV to a
Right.
company is kind of completely almost turned out to be an artifact that it is needed in some instances, but not in all.
Right. Well, something just came across my mind. I mean, Susan talked about the shiny CV. Telmo talks about, the two extremes, whether there's a very well crafted and then there's a poor CV. Just sparks questions that I want to ask, I think, to Susan, and I think I'm going to ask this to Telmo also, is that um, what are some red flags that you now notice on CVs that you didn't before, knowing that, it can be AI generated, right? It can be, like someone asked Telmo to, help me write the CVs. What are the what are the red flags that you now notice?
I mean, AI is one, right? Like it's so obvious what's being written by AI. It's just not natural language. And it's almost the opposite of being very clear on the $10 million deal. It's almost
Right.
everyone has done a transformation of some sort, um, I think now I go back to more and more, I feel like it's less relevant because it's just so easy to prepackaged CV, right? So again,
Right.
if you sort of Google it, get a better sense of holistic, you just have a better picture. So yeah, so right now I think CV is the I wouldn't call it red flag. I think in reality is just you get more of these, and that just being mindful of what information do you need from there and for what. And to Talmo's case, sometimes you just need it as part of communication to your hiring manager. Just
Right.
because you are okay not to do it, you recognize that hiring managers still need to have a baseline of understanding to get a better sense, right? So I think it's just recognizing what do you use it for and
Right.
what are some of the multi-layer that may come with it.
Right. Right. I think for me, Susan, is the M dash, because you know that it's AI generated, right? With the chat GPT. So going to be
You
the
know,
M.
they have improved that how M dash is being shown. So yes. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I just think it removes the human dimension of
Right.
the candidate, and that's what we actually want, right? We're trying to get a better understanding of them as holistic human beings.
Right. Right. What about you, Tomo? What are some red flags that you now noticed?
Yeah, I think along the same lines. So whenever it's too generic or too much fluff, that those are
Yeah.
the obvious signals, right? It's even for me as a CV writer, I need for the person to write the CV, right? I can kind of guide them on how something would look, but I don't know what numbers they did. I don't know exactly what the accomplishments, neither does the AI, no matter how much input you give it. I think
Right.
you have a unique view that's sometimes very hard to elaborate to someone else about your your own experience. And AI can't do that for you. It's going to give you generic, it's going to give you fluff, not a concise, I did this and the impact and all of that. That needs to come through you, or sometimes, yes, with the help of someone that can kind of help you elaborate that. But then again, it needs probing. A lot of in these sessions, what I do is like, okay, but tell me exactly what you did. You're still not like giving me any impact.
Right.
Let's, okay, in the next session that we have, give me 3 KPIs, right? What have you improved? Like AI is still not at this stage where it can probe someone like that. So yeah, you see that generic, very fluffy, not fluffy, fluff in the series.
The VP. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So moving on to the next question, I think let's talk about assumptions because every CV suddenly makes us assume something. So I think to Susan, what's the most dangerous assumption a CV can make us believe about a candidate, and how does that show up in reality?
So I would say, given the context of what's happening with the economy, a dangerous assumption is looking at someone's experience seniority and assume that is what they are looking at for their next role. I think there is a huge reawakening of what people want the future work to be, right? So I'm seeing a lot more roles, people applying for roles or being part of a recruitment process that doesn't feel as intuitive to the experience. So I think the danger assumption is immediately discount that to say, oh, they're too senior. Oh, they're okay. Maybe usually is that case, not that they are, too junior, or oh, they don't want to relocate. Oh, this is the remote. They've been working remotely. Actually, just this morning, I talked to someone who has been freelancing for 10 years, and I'm kind of like, why? Like, why all of a sudden, right? So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of assumption we're making about why people apply for job or what is their aspiration or personal circumstances that I do be mindful to keep in check and say, what am I looking for? Do they have the right baseline to at least get into the conversation? I've been calling first interview no longer interviews. Actually, I've been calling them introductions. And I feel like that's probably a better way instead of me interviewing. Let's just have an introduction. Let me get to know you. You get to know me or the company that I'm working with, and take it from there.
Right.
Take the
Right.
pressure out of this prediction and matching, and
Right.
and that's kind of something new I've started to do recently, just because just that assumption of a match is not always so clear and direct.
Right. And actually, I like that introduction as opposed to interview because interview can sound intimidating. People will get anxious, like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to get interviewed." But if it's an introduction, it's just going to be, a chat. So I think it's more comfortable in a sense that it's not tense, right? Is there any particular bias that still surprises you, even after all these years of experience?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Uh, Based on, I think you mean CVs, and um, I think I have to say though, and I'm a little bit biased also now, just because I've been interviewing today. Sometimes it surprises me when we are talking about CVs, right? I get really well written and intense, clearly well prepared CV, but they still come to interviews less prepared.
Right.
So I don't. I always get surprised when people show up and not being prepared. Although, as I say this out loud, I wonder our current employment environment also means that they're in a different type of pressure. They're probably talking to a lot more people, trying
Yeah.
to secure the next step. Does that impact their ability, right? So I think it's also important to take the context into consideration. So we bring a lot more compassion and empathy into some of these conversations.
Nice. Thank you, Susan. What about you, Tomo? What's the most dangerous assumption a CV can make us believe about a candidate?
Mm, that they actually worked in the companies, right? I think that they say that they actually work during those times, and that's what reference checks are. It's a validation of that information, but and it is very hard to put in place kind of reference checks if your company is small, if you don't have the budgets for it. But at the end, the CV is kind of the frontline assessment, right? Should we even spend the time, invest the time to interview the person? Interviews You interview, can the person do the job? But then has the person actually have done the job? And I think sometimes having done the job doesn't mean that they can do it. Not having done the job doesn't mean also that they
They
cannot
can
do
do
the
it.
job.
Yeah.
But the matter of fact is the information you put out there as what got your foot in the door needs to be accurate. And just assuming that it's accurate, sometimes even in bigger companies, and we've seen that play out, people having multiple jobs or not having the experience that they say that they have. Yeah, that can have huge costs. So you just assume that the information is accurate when it's not. They say that they've been in the company for 3 years when they've only spent there a few months. So all of that sometimes needs to be put in place as well, just to make sure, yeah, that employment references are checked.
Right, right. Just out of curiosity, because you've helped a lot of people in creating their CVs. So, and this is just me being Asian, I guess. So, do you think there's assumptions for or that are cultural? So, like, because Asians tend to be more humble, they as opposed to Western where they can feel more confident. Do you see that
Yeah,
happening?
completely. So what I would say is that the more you approach the West all the way to the US, the more that cockiness, confidence comes in. There's a spectrum, right? To the very, I would say, if you go all the way to Japan, where people are quite humble, if sometimes it's kind of from a cultural perspective seen as a bad thing if you kind of not brag about what you did, but kind of what you've accomplished and be confident and happy
Yeah.
about it. I think Singaporeans I've seen are much better at this. They got kind of that Western flair that they're not afraid of. I did this and I'm very proud of it.
Right.
In Indonesia, Japan, I've seen that people are a lot more, they kind of almost put that down as like, oh yeah, yes, I led the project. It's like, yeah, you could have started with that. So very much of a cultural difference, and sometimes it is my job as a career coach to say like, if you actually have done that, you need to put that kind of,
Yeah.
it's a fact. It's not a, don't
It's not
play it
brag,
down.
right? It's not a
Yeah,
brag.
exactly. And sometimes you see that people don't put enough of that information, those what are facts. And there's also the other people, it's like, oh, I've done all this. It's like, okay, but actually what have you done? It's like, yeah, then you're lying in your CV. We need to bring that a little bit to reality. So there's the two extremes definitely from a cultural perspective.
All right. Thank you for the powerful insights. I think it's clear that CVs tell us something, but not necessarily the truth, which makes us go to segment two right now, how the role of CV shifts across contexts. Now let's move into how the CV's role shifts depending on context, geographical, seniority, and technology. I think for Susan, you've led HR transformations in some of the world's biggest organizations. Have we, as HR professionals, unintentionally created a CV arms race where candidates are optimizing for algorithm instead of authenticity?
Well, I also use the word transformation, but definitely with people. I'm not single-handedly in transformation. But coming back to, related to what you have just, asked about, is it an unintentional HR creation? I think it's probably somewhat unintentionally created by all these other things that's around us, right? Around, again, the access to AI, and now given the competitiveness for finding jobs and challenges, I think there's multi-layer why we are where we are today, right? And in terms of general HR practice, it feels like that is a nice, safe landing ground to be. Like there is something that we can look at so that we can react to it, whether it's say yes or say no. And I think I want to be fair to say that right now, the technology, for example, if I'm allowed to name, like LinkedIn with the quick reply, sorry, apply, right? Easy apply is
Yeah.
making companies saying each thing I list, I have 700 CVs that I have to screen, right? So, recognizing this plays two parts of of why we're introducing more technology, and that's why people try to game the system and the algorithm. So it's a multi-layer why we're where we are today, I think. So it feels like more a systematic challenge rather
Right.
than just an HR. I don't know if HR single-handedly can also change and shift that with what's going on right now.
Right. You mentioned about the LinkedIn with the easy apply, which I think it's part of the gaming of the system. How do you think we can balance the fairness with that growing ease of gaming the system?
I think we need to find ways to allow the candidate to showcase themselves differently. So I'm actually a big fan, and for those who's on the call, I don't know if you guys know Astronaut in its early days was actually a platform for video recruitment, right? I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of allowing the candidate to showcase himself differently without putting too much pressure. So we're not saying do a 15-minute, the Grammy Award winning kind of film production. We're saying, hey, use 2 minutes to give us an intro. So instead of saying, looking through 6 pages CVs to say, hi, I'm Susan. I've been working in HR for 18 years and I would
Right.
just give a flavor of that. And I'm a big fan of how do we introduce these lightweight ability. But of course, going back to diversity, not everyone's comfortable in front of the camera, right? So what are other ways that we don't bias them? But isn't that the same when we say not everyone's great writing and CV? So
Yeah.
I think there's balancing it out, but allowing people to present themselves in a different way, I think.
Right. Thank you. So for Telmo, you've worked across Europe, Middle East, and pretty much the globe. How do regional practices either challenge or reinforce the myths around CVs?
I think it has to do less about the geography, but more about the maturity of some markets. And the less, and by that I mean, like, for example, Singapore in Asia, I would say it's the most mature, right? UK in Europe, the most mature. Then in the Americas, then it would be the US and in Canada versus all the other ones. So you can't really kind of just say a continent and generalize. But it has to do with the maturity of the markets. The more mature, so the more competition there is in terms of choice that the employees have, the candidates have, the more you need to improve your practices, the more you need to be smart about the way you go about hiring, about selecting people. And I've seen that originally I'm Portuguese, so I work there for my first year of experience, and I've noticed that there was a lot more biases from hiring managers. There was a lot more lengthy processes that we drag along the candidate. We didn't really know what we were assessing for, and as I moved to London, that's the shift. It was okay. We need to make it a good experience. We need
Right.
to unbias a lot of the CVs or our approach to reviewing CVs, to doing the interviews. What can we ask? What can we not ask? As I moved to the Middle East from London, it was a little bit going back to Portugal in the sense that a lot more bias introduced, a lot of assumptions that the hiring managers make, a lot more of the dragging candidates. It's going in a good direction because a lot more competition. But yeah, it has to do with the maturity of the markets, and that sometimes it is about the how long the markets have been there. Sometimes it's just about how fast they grow and how much they mature and have to kind of be competitive.
Right. So you're talking about bias just now. Do you see any progress in those regions toward skills-based or bias-aware hiring?
Yeah, it doesn't come from the same, I would say, root. In the West is very much kind of I would say it has to do more with the moral argument towards that, inclusivity and all of that. I think here it comes more from the cost of making bad hires because you've
Right.
made a bias, right? In terms of we were talking about job titles. That's a good one. Is like manager something is like they actually haven't managed anyone. We just assume from the start, we never asked, and they start on a management position without any leadership training.
Right.
So the cost of that has been so high in some instances that yeah, it made a lot of people question a lot of the practices.
Right. I guess in my case, my first job was a client account manager. It sounds like a manager, right? But it's basically just account managing. So yeah, I think I get your point. So I think this is a question for the both of you. I think for Susan first. Can you share one case where a great CV led to a bad hire or a missing gem who was rejected too soon?
Well, I would say if the missing gem, we wouldn't know because we have not hired them. Right. So,
Right.
but in theory, there's definitely, I'm sure that we have missed great hires because of, I wouldn't say because of CV, I would say because of how we traditionally thinking about job fit and experience, right? Which means that they could have a great CV, it just doesn't feel like is aligned to the role that you're trying to hire, even though there's actually a lot of opportunity for that to um, sort of move and shift and change as well. In terms of great CV that resulted in not great hire, I would have to say though, right? Like we're now talking about CV again. That's the topic today. The reality is from CV to hiring, there's a lot of other things in between, right? So
Right.
bad hire is not because they have a great CV. They have a great CV that open the door, that into them get them into a process that get them hired. So sometimes the issue may not be the CV, it's also the things that follow, right? So I want to sort of
Right.
call out to say is not just the CV. So yes, we definitely have made some hires that the CV got them into the door, have crafted a certain first impressions that carry out through the recruitment process. So maybe the bigger question is what are the other additional dimensions we should be facilitating post the CV conversation? We're not looking for confirmation bias. I think more and more, how do we drive processes that almost force us to say we want signals that is opposite to the CV, or we want a signal that's not in the
Right.
CV versus the CV says they are a head of account that done 10 million. We're just going to keep reiterating that within our process to confirm that bias. So I would say the reality is a lot more complex, but yes, many CV has opened doors, led to hiring, but I would say there's opportunity to do also review and re-engineer what happens after that door opening with the CV.
Right. So, coming back to that, so have you come across cases where holistic assessment tools gave opportunities to candidates who would have been filtered out by CVs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of kind of assessment centers for early career, right? So I
Right.
think that allows that that's how do people stand out, right? When their CV all looks similar. And I'm also a big believer in using multi-dimensional data to think about internal succession planning,
Right.
promotion. So if we think about recruitment, also from an internal recruitment
Yeah.
perspective,
Yeah.
I think it's been seeing great success. But also, what we try to do, in talent scope as well, is how do we support organization to think about human in a multidimensional way and look at their CV. So a great bias is also just because someone hasn't done a role before, it doesn't mean they don't have the transferable skills.
Yeah.
But how do we quantify that? How do we find the multiple data points? And when I say multiple data point, some of the things that we believe is about 16 data point we try to collect to holistic understand someone. And that includes, could be 360 feedback, engagement
Right.
survey. I'm talking about internal candidates,
Yeah.
right? Also feedback from previous project, performance review, of course, psychometrics,
Yeah.
but all these things should not stand alone. So how do I holistically bring on something together? I definitely see it there has a much better success rate when you look at that holistically versus just as a manager, when someone to get a promotion and they get promoted, right?
Yeah.
Versus a much more holistic way to assess.
Right. Thank you, Susan. Going to you, Tomo. Can you share one case where a great CV led to a bad hire or
Uh,
a missing gem who was rejected too soon?
Not necessarily, and then again, Susan gave such a great answer that I have nothing to add to add there. So well done, Susan. No, I think for me, I never had kind of the situation where because most of the hiring that I've done through my experience has been either very kind of senior roles or very kind of specialized where we do need the CV, we need to have all of that information ahead of time. But one of the almost missing gems was actually someone that came through an agency that we were partnering with. And on the surface, it was an immediate no for me. It was it's not a good CV, was missing experience and all that. But it was when I spoke with the recruiter from the agency, so the agency recruiter that gave me more context and pushed back a little bit. And then eventually we hired the person. I pushed back on the hiring manager after meeting the person. But the
Right.
only signal that was positive was during the interview, right? Not the before, not the CV. And that sometimes it is the case that we just, if that is missing, you missed out on a good on a good hire straight away because that's what the foot in the door for a lot of people.
Right. So coming back to Susan, you talk about signals, and I think Telma also has this experience in hiring for senior leaders. When you evaluate leaders or senior roles, what signals do you rely on now that the CV can't show?
So I think we sometimes over index on hiring seniors and getting the even more senior people to assess them. They're going to be leading a team. They're going to
Yeah.
work with peers. Very often we sometimes involve peers, but they get all like, competitive. Sometimes we definitely not sometimes we always have like the manager, right? I think like
Yeah.
a huge piece that we kept missing out on is the actual team reporting to them. And some of the biggest challenge when you have a new manager or I see senior leaders that actually don't succeed is actually they can't lead a team. They couldn't let that team to be part of the working success. So I kind of feel like that is a huge missed opportunity, and that's the type of signal I really would like to get better hold of. How do they manage team, those interaction, those conversations, and not theoretical, right? Not like tell
Yeah.
me a time that you have managed a team. Be like, no, you're gonna talk to the people you have to lead, and they should have a say
Yeah.
in whether this is the right leader to lead them into that next stage. Yeah.
Cool. Cool.
Right. Just want to add there because that's such an interesting point that as a recruiter, what happens is kind of whoever is leading the search a lot of the times is the CEO or someone, right? And they're like, okay, they need to meet with the head of marketing, the head of sales, and all of these heads and then there's no time for them to meet anyone in the team. So you hire a person who's going to be leading the team that has never met the team. They just met all of these heads of, but a lot of the times already they're on their fifth, sixth interview. Are you going to put an additional interview for them to meet one member of the team, the
Right.
10 members of the team? So quite a tricky space to navigate, but then it's a crucial mistake because then a lot of the times what happens is they either do really well or they kind of completely ruin what was a working, very well working team.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that, yeah, for senior leaders, we're going to meet the heads, but, not the team. So how do you personally test for like their resilience or their influence? So, something that's invisible leadership traits. Uh, uh,
Question, right? I think that's why going back to the multi-dimensional way to collect those data, right? It's really hard for them to say, again, just give me a time that you show resilience. Again, if you're able to take a multi-dimensional way of collecting data, and actually to a certain extent, I almost feel like if um, we don't always get access to those data, right? Before. And I'm seeing more and more companies do this thing, what they call a backdoor reference. So when you can't
Right.
collect real data, like when I say real, I mean inside organization, you can have access to performance data and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
With the new hires, a lot harder. I'm seeing a lot more of these. Who knows? Who knows? Who knows who? You know what? Is you the world is so small. When you're senior enough, there's always going to be someone who knows you. So
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
those who's listening, it's also like don't burn bridges. That's why I'm always like, be kind. Be kind is the first thing because people are gonna talk. And I'm telling you, I still get calls on backdoor references for people who I've interacted 6, 10 years ago, right?
Right.
So I think to answer your question, the test I think is whether the market reputation, and now we're talking about senior, like really senior,
Yeah.
right? The junior ones, again, there's great ways to do assessment centers and assessments results. But for seniors, I think that has probably been the most accurate. And I've seen hires that didn't go ahead because they did not pass the vibe check of
Right.
the community.
Right.
And I think that's in reality something that truly it's quite impactful to get the most correct data. Oh,
Right.
relevant, not correct, the most relevant
Relevant.
for
Yeah.
decision making.
Yeah. So if I can quote you on that, so don't burn bridges, because relationship goes a long way. Yeah. Okay. What about you, Tamo? How do you personally test for that invisible leadership traits that not shown in CVs?
Yeah, it's quite hard as Susan said. Because if it's not for kind of those hypothetical questions or kind of behavioral questions, right? There's not a lot of ways to assess. You can do the assessments of leadership style and all of that, but then in the end, how much of that is actual reflection? Especially for senior folks, they've done these tests over and over. They know their styles of leadership. So actually, how much are you getting out of it? That's where I do agree with Susan, where whether it be an informal, formal kind of reference check does play a big part. I would say though, for this level of seniority, the CV does play a part in terms of their experience. Have they been in similar companies in the same kind of stage? Because if you hire a senior person for a startup and all their experience has been in corporate, it's just a mismatch, right? And I think sometimes we overlook that in hiring for startups. It's just we bring someone very senior who just cannot adapt to, is not hands-on enough. Or the same could be said someone from a startup is just going to be very disruptive in a corporate.
Yeah, because I think culturally it's very different, right? I think in a corporate world it's more structured, where in startup it's more like, we pivot all the time, right? So I think there's that difference there. Okay, so going to the next questions, I think for Susan and also Tomo, what do you think will happen if companies do not evolve away from CV soon? Like, what are the risks that they face at the top level?
I feel like Tomo to go first.
Yes, so yeah, what will happen if companies don't evolve away from CV soon? And what risk do they face at the top level?
Um, I think the real risk is this CV arms race that you were talking about, right? Is I'm seeing even like in my kind of side thing, if career coach building CVs, a lot of people coming to me is like, oh, I want a ATS friendly CV, and I'm like, what is that? Because of the application tracking systems that I've operated with, even at Google, right, they have their own, they do not filter for keywords. There's a team that reviews CVs, right?
Right.
LinkedIn with Easy Apply kind of put those filters in place where people get rejected automatically. And I would say don't apply through Easy Apply on LinkedIn. But yeah, there's some kind of ways that we're getting there. Some ATSs, Ashby and others are getting to that point where they're kind of reviewing. So the ATS is doing their own decisions. But then people are also leveraging AI to do the same, and we're kind of it's bots fighting with bots kind of situation. So as a company, if that's the path that you're going for, you're just going to be fighting with more technology, and you're going to put in
Right.
place technology to fight with the technology from the other side, where
Right.
even the AI interviewers that a lot of companies are putting in place are still missing the mark. They do not give the signals around communication, the signals that we need from a candidate. Are they going to be able to do the job or not? Because in the end, it's a robot reviewing, it's a robot assessing. We need the kind of the human that is there with their own judgment. And over time, a recruiter gets a really good judgment out of a candidate just in the first kind of few minutes of the conversation. If we don't anchor on that, if we don't anchor on what is it that we want to assess and how are we going to assess and actually do the work, that is a lot of work that is required, but bank of questions,
Right.
rubrics, like at this level, what do we expect? How do we assess for that? What are kind of expected outcomes of that answer? That is a meaty work, but that is a needed work as well as interviewer training and all of that. That's where we do kind of good hires. That's where things come from. We can automate a lot of this, but it is not at the kind of the cost of the value that recruitment, a TA function brings to a company. If we're going to go down that route, what's going to happen is that we're going to get the talent that is really doing the workarounds, right? Doing the lazy work, leveraging AI just to game the system. Are those actually going to be the best hires? Possibly not.
Right. Susan, you want to add to that?
Hmm. Again, I think we index a lot on the sort of CV today. I think fundamentally it will be really interesting to just rethink about recruitment and the process and the whole engagement model. Again, right? Where is the starting point? Like, what if the starting point isn't CV? What if the starting point could be something else? Again, just putting that out there.
Yeah.
So I think if we don't, we're just gonna get into this vicious cycle of a lot of application, a lot of human trying to get through the application, and because they don't have the time, it's just not humanly possible. You introduce technology, there's fight. I think we're just going to get into this vicious cycle because you know what, technology is going to get better, right? Um, there are going to be more people that continue to want to do more work. I think it's just the dangers that we're going to get into that vicious cycle if we don't do something different. Yeah, so that's really, just anchoring everything Tomo said. But just kind of, I feel like we are in that kind of vicious cycle that I'm not seeing a lot of innovation. I'm seeing a lot of technology that try to solve the current problem of volume,
Right.
not solving for biases, but solving for volume, right? That's why you have AI recruiters. That's why
Right.
you have the ATS screening. They're all solving for speed. They're not solving for biases. They're not
Or
solving for the skills
accuracy.
match to right. Like
Yeah.
Telmo's point about, how do we make sure the skills based hiring, right? It's just I think we're not actually solving the actual problem that we need to solve.
Yeah. Right. And I think to add to that, that is a very good point from Susan is, and I think this is a general issue with AI, right? Having been in deep minds from a long time ago, I've seen AI kind of as it was being developed. And now that it became kind of mainstream, all of these companies are just plugging in AI and they're not kind of looking at their systems or at their processes. They're just plugging in AI to kind of, okay, we have too many CVs, let's plug here. We have too many interviews, let's plug here.
Right.
Instead of looking as like, then should we have the process like this? Can we revise the process and then
Right.
try to embed some? But the problem with AI in general, don't want to get into that conversation too much, but is we don't know the problem that we're solving for. We are just plugging in AI where it exists, where it's easy, and just hope for the best. And yeah, that if you don't know what problem you're solving, you're just introducing random technology at a certain point that may actually add to a lot more work in general, more expenses as well.
Right, right. Now we touched a lot about AI just in a few last few minutes. So I think we're ready for segment three, which is the moving toward better solutions. So now that we've dissected the problem in the previous discussion, let's focus on the future. I think all these questions will be asked to Susan and Telmo. I think the first question would be, Susan, looking 5 years ahead, which HR practice that relies heavily on CVs today that will disappear, and what will replace it?
Oh my, I mean, if I know that, if I get $1, everyone's no. I mean, when you say the one that's relied the mostly on CV, obviously the recruitment process, right? And what can replace it? This is a really good point because I feel like I'm in this catch 22, right? I said the right number.
Right.
Like you don't want to say AI is going to be part of this. I don't know having a smarter, better AI is going to do this. I almost feel like we need to go back to the fundamentals, right? Go back to a world before CV is available.
Right.
Like, what
Right.
do people do? You know, it's a little bit like, what do people do before internet, right? What do people do before emails? They write, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm kind of asking myself the question of what do you do if CV as a construct don't exist anymore? And then you start having beautiful things that could happen that look differently, right? How about portfolio based? How about
Right.
I'll just showcase to you, let's say in HR, right? Like instead of me on my CV to say that I know how to build a comp band, like show you a portfolio of
Yeah.
companies where I have built different comp bands and how do I use it. Like the narrative is so much more interesting. Like if we stop asking people to say, give me your CV, but give me your most interesting project that you have done that you think is most relevant for the job you apply. What are we going to get? The
Yeah.
flavors that we're gonna get, right? The conversations. So I kind of feel like we should just reimagine a world without CV, right? And the reality is that if people don't have a relevant, interesting portfolio, then they can also self-select, right? Right now with the CV, you can apply for any jobs. So I'm a little bit, obviously, somewhat optimistic of can we move in the world like that, but being mindful this will obviously have biases. So there's certain things that still make sense to have your more traditional processes. Or again, I'm a big fan of assessment center for
Right.
earlier. But why not for senior? Actually, why not? Why not? Actually, isn't that why we have TV shows? That's why we love watching The Apprentice for the
Yeah.
senior executive fighting it out. Like, I just feel like our world we're becoming, and that's my biggest concern. I feel like we become even more selective for the early career and much less selective for the executive.
That's
And
actually
is that the right balance? And does that contribute to those future workforce and the generation of leaders we're trying to build?
right. Right. Actually, that was my second question, but I think you've answered already. I was gonna ask if you could design the ideal hiring system from scratch, no legacy CVs. What would it would look like? That you just answered it. So thank you, Susan. You read my mind. Okay, going to Telmo now. Again, Telmo. So looking 5 years ahead, which HR practice that relies heavily on CVs today that will disappear? And
Uh, yeah, I think we're going to have we already have this issue, but we're going to have this issue twofold, right? With volume, right? What we're seeing is, especially as the market is not in a great condition as it was before, a lot more candidates applying, a lot less relevant applications. I do like Susan's idea of the portfolio, right? I hire, for example, designers. Even now I'm hiring for a graphic designer, and that's all we look at. If the portfolio is good, I don't even care about their experience, and
right,
that's the first thing that I look at. Because designers, that's what you review. Like there's work to be shown. Sometimes with engineers, there's kind of code
right,
repositories, projects that you can look at for quality of code. but all of the other ones a little bit harder to do that. But I would even go beyond that. Is kind of there isn't a digital ID almost that we can kind of, okay, the person has scored X in these assessments. They have these references that anyone can go there to the QR code or digital ID and check for those references and who to reach out to. Um, there isn't that collection of information. There's just a CV of this is my experience, and sometimes even irrelevant information of references available upon request. Like, okay, I can ask that. That line doesn't give me anything, but there is that missing kind of almost digital or professional ID that I have all of the information there, can be password secured and all of that. But yeah, it is missing that element that I don't know how we create. I think LinkedIn missed a little bit the mark. They're very good in standardizing
Right.
the CV, right? If you look at a CV is very hard to go from reviewing one CV to the other one. LinkedIn, if I open a bunch of tabs, I can kind of compare candidates, but it needs to go beyond that to actually have proof of work, proof of previous
Right.
assessments, and all of that. For example, English being one, you can be certified through a few institutions about your English. It should be there as kind of almost like, okay, it's not just that candidate said it, there's a kind of almost like a
Certificates or something
a
that,
certificate, yeah, without trusting the candidate, but actually needs to be the company issuing that certificate in
right.
the ID. So all of those things are missing. Same with references. Just because it's written, I don't know, right? So it is about that of kind of that trust element built in a professional digital ID of some kind.
Okay, thank you. So my next question would be, I find it very tricky because when I try to ask this, I can't answer it. Like, which is why I want to get your insights, both from Telmo and Susan. So Susan, would AI and psychometrics replace human intuition, or should they coexist?
Can I go, Susan, or do you want to go ahead?
No, you should.
So this is a very interesting one for me because I studied psychology. So I studied how to do the psychometrics as well. They should coexist. There's a lot of benefit of having the psychometric tests and other assessments. But as the CV, those can be gamed as well. As any psychology student will tell you, very easily they know how to game a psychometric test as long as they know what is the test assessing for. It's quite easy. So the quality of the test does play a part, but that human intuition, whether we talk about assessments, AI tools, whatever, that human intuition that is built over the experience of a recruiter,
Right,
very, very hard. Even a hiring manager, I would say, does not have the same level of intuition. Otherwise, they would be put in the first stage of the interview, not the recruiter, to filter out candidates. But yeah, it's very easy for a recruiter to realize, is a candidate lying or not? Do they have this experience? Or asking the questions in a very friendly but have you done this by yourself or was it with a team? And like no foul play of any kind, but it is that skill that is built
right,
over time that yeah, you can't just replace that. However, a lot of things are missed. That's where assessments come, like leadership style, right?
right,
How do you deal with difficult situations? Like all of these, much easier to get through an assessment, possibly more convenient than getting that through just situational type of questions in an interview. Interviews alone are also not a good metric if someone is going to be able to do well in the role.
right. I think Susan mentioned this earlier about vibe check. I think that is also something that, technology cannot replace because I think for me, I did a recent hire and they are both
Right, I think we lost you there.
Am I?
Oh,
We're
yeah,
back.
you're
I'm back.
back.
You're good.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, touching a bit about the vibe check. I was just telling a story about my recent hire where I actually select someone based on the vibe because they are going to work with me, right? So I really need to know whether we can get along chemistry wise, and I think that is something that the technology can't replace. So going back to Susan, the same question: should AI psychometrics replace human intuition, or should they coexist?
No, I mean, absolutely. I think they should coexist. And I think recognizing again, though, both have biases, right? AI, again, AI is trained by humans. So there is a human biases that is embedded in there. Human intuitions are biased. And the reality is, putting it out there, right? Again, been working in HR for the last 20 years, there's no way we can remove biases 100%. There's just no way. We're human. That's part of it. So if anything is just try our best to collect multiple, again, multi-dimensional data, asking the right question, do the vibe checks, and then just recognize that nothing is going to be perfect, but I think we should try to use it as two different tools, right? Like the vibe check as a tool, the human as a tool, the AI as a tool, and then having the opportunity to triangulate some of those findings.
Right. Cool. So I have two more questions before we go to the Q&A. I think the second last question. To build fair and future-ready workforces, what's one non-negotiable step every talent leader should take starting tomorrow? Tell me, you want to go?
Sorry, can you repeat the first part?
To build fair and future-ready workforces, what's one non-negotiable step every talent leader should take starting tomorrow?
I think part is just revising the way we go about hiring. There isn't enough of, I see this a lot being done in HR, like the way we evaluate people, the way we go about compensation, being kind of almost completely scrapped and built from scratch. I don't see that enough in recruitment. I think we got very complacent and we don't want to change anything because the higher it's almost kind of it's a moving vehicle. You don't have time to stop. You don't stop until the next performance cycle or the
Right.
next compensation review. You're just always hiring and you don't have time to let's stop and revise this. I think we've missed the boat during COVID times where we weren't hiring. And instead of looking at this, we just kind of like, oh, okay, let's just source more people and do fun projects, but not actually, okay, let's revise all of this, scrape it, let's do it. And then it's just a churning wheel that, like I say, is quite hard too. But
Yeah.
as a lead, you need to dedicate, if you're starting in a new company, just dedicate part of the team to actually focus on that, maybe hold off on the hiring by half and then business as usual for the team, but the other ones are actually looking at revising a lot of this. But this goes hand in hand with HR when it comes to learning and development of the people that join and all of that. So it's not a unilateral sits with TA.
Right. So you mentioned earlier when it's the COVID time and then we had a missed opportunity. Do you think we should have completely redefined hiring from the ground up at that time? Or or
I
is
think so.
evolution more realistic than revolution?
Yeah, it is. But I'm a revolutionary by nature, and I do like to basically do things in a way that are very pragmatic. I think we were very pragmatic by not by choice, but by force in having people do the video interviews, right? We went from you need to come to the office, meet
Right.
with this, meet with that, do the assessments maybe in the office to everyone's doing online interviews. And even now, what we decided is even though some of us might be back in the office, those interviews are still happening online because it's faster, right?
Yeah.
It improves. So that thing, that dimension we changed, we had no issues with, but actually, again, looking at the systems, that we have an issue with because it's too transformational. It changes too many things. I understand that for corporates, much harder to do this, but for startups, just coming at a startup and be like, oh, this is what I used to do at Google or Amazon or anything like that. It's easy. You just built whatever it existed before, but you're not being pragmatic. You're not
Right.
working for the scale that exists right now. You're just doing a plug and play, copy paste of what you're used to.
Right. Right. Okay. So going to Susan now. Again, the question would be to build fair and future-ready workforce, what's one non-negotiable step every talent leader should take starting tomorrow?
Hmm. I think the biggest one is the mindset shift, right?
Mm.
Is the shift away from taking things for granted or
Right.
um, checking our own assumptions, right? So I think if we can all start by, okay, if we continue to do this CV thing, what if we don't have CV? Again, I'm a big fan of the death of best practices, right? Unpack everything. If we say the best practice of CV, let's remove that and say what could that look like. So I think that is more a mindset shift. Again, though, I want to sort of fully empathize with TA leaders or leaders that's hiring. That it's very daunting right now. There's a lot of applicants. There's a lot of expectation. The economy is not great. There's a lot of
Yeah.
change and shifts, and that's why people like best practice. There's safety in that, right? There's safety. There's security. There's ways for us to refer to a comfortable future. So, if anything, I think to start tomorrow is like, can you just experiment with one thing? So don't say as a whole company for every role we're going to move into portfolio. Is there one role that you can say, can we experiment with no CV and just look at portfolios, right? And
Yeah.
then start small, even though revolutionary is great, but recognizing it's a tough time. Could they, finding these little moments of experiment so that we get ready for that bigger transformation.
Cool. Cool. So you talk about mind shifting, right? I think this would be my last question for the both of you. If you had to convince a very skeptical CEO or business leaders who still believes in CV, what would you say in one line?
Hmm. One line to convince them to not love CV? Or
One line to convince that we should move away from CVs,
hmm.
I would ask them what they estimate the cost to be of a bad hire.
right? So it all comes down to, again, ROI, yeah?
Because that would be the decisive factor for any executive. And a lot of them won't have an answer for it, but it's a leading path, right? You ask the question to get them to, if they were to make a business decision based on partial data, that would be the case as well, right? There's a risk associated with that. And then with any risk, then there's also a cost that
Yeah.
might be associated with that. There also might not be, but then it's a gamble. You're gambling. You're not making
Yeah.
executive decisions.
Yeah.
A good one. Well, I think like Tomo said, it's probably like a beginning of a conversation, right? But I will probably get them to say, like just tell me the last time or tell me the last amazing CV that you remembered.
Right.
And and then do we hire that person? And what was the outcome?
Right. Did
Tell
did
me a
they
little bit
perform?
more.
Like
Yeah, like, let's talk about it. That's because sometimes I don't even think we do a retro, right? There's a bad hire, and sometimes we just sort of get on with it, let's replace them. And I think if you do a retro, there's many interesting thing you can unpack more than just a CV. Although I'm also a big fan of like metaphor, right? So depending on or getting them to think very differently outside. So typically, if you're a startup, if they work with partners, and I will kind of be like, tell me if you would have signed this $10 million deal if they just gave you their pitch deck.
Right.
Like give them something that is equivalent in the business to get them feel the pain in a different way. It's probably
Yeah.
how I would get a leading conversation going. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys. So I think it's time to open the questions to the audience. So for who's joining the Zoom, I think we've shared the link to the Slido earlier. Wendy, can you share the questions? Oh, wow. There's actually a lot of questions. There's 6 questions. We do only have around 10 to 15 minutes. So I think, I don't know, Telmo, Susan, I think you can just choose 2 questions each because we only have 10 more minutes. Oh, there's one specifically to each of you. Okay, so let's just ask Telmo this one. You said good candidate signals. You said good candidate signals show more at interview, not early. Is it possible to bring those signals earlier in the selection?
For sure. If we do have kind of a 2-minute video recording, that's something we can bring early on, right? Or if we have those questions even in the application form, then we get those signals. But we do need to know what we want, what signals are we trying to capture, and yeah, where at what stage. We don't need to wait for the interviews to have those signals for sure. The thing with either the 2-minute video interviews or even these AI interviews is that sometimes we miss out on good people because they don't want to do them. They outright refuse to speak with a bot or to do the video recording. So we need to plan for that friction as well, that may be better on the application. On the application, I'm a fan of just adding these questions that actually kind of it requires time, right? It's either you're interested or not, because otherwise you're also going to have a lot of volume
Yeah.
of CV. So it's a good way of both capturing that, of whoever is interested, we capture the signals, and we reduce volume.
Okay. Thank you. Question to Susan. How can we spot hidden talent when strong abilities don't always show on a basic CV, especially if it's the first screening step?
Mm. So I think one is again redefine your recruitment process, right? So one thing that I know we all love a good ATS, with a smaller organization, we start, being a little bit more open, kind of like send your introduction to these emails, and you'd be surprised the things that you get, how that gives you a first signal, right? You can tell where someone just cut and paste for everything. You can see someone who's being a bit of thoughtful to say, I've studied the research, I've seen this role. So there's some ways I think it's about asking better question at the beginning. If we don't want them to do a portfolio, like show us portfolio at the beginning, how do we ask question that we think is going to show a little bit of, if anything, I'm not looking for strong abilities at the first meeting. I'm looking for mindsets. So I would ask like a growth mindset question. So my favorite question kind of is kind of like, tell me the last big failure that you have and what did you learn
Right.
from that? Whoa, it's a lot to ask in the first one, but people who actually sit down and reflect and, give you a little paragraph that give you some early signal, right? But it
Yeah.
requires the recruitment process to allow for that and feel comfortable. And again, what are you looking for, right? I'm a big believer in grit and growth mindset. So
Yeah.
for me, that's even more important than capabilities. So that's having those questions up front. So even without a CV, I don't have to look at a CV. I can look at paragraph and then give me a signal around other potentially hidden gem and hidden talent.
Cool. Thanks, Susan. I think there's 2 questions talking about biases. So
Mm.
these are questions to the both of you. Um, To what extent does unconscious bias affect CV screening, and what practices can we help to make evaluations fairer?
I can go on that. I don't know if we can put a percentage on it, but basically biases are just the heuristics we make, right? In that depends on our experience, or in is just a shortcut for us to make a decision. All of us will have that. To what degree we use or are trained to kind of block out that noise or question ourselves, that's a little bit different. That's where I would say the percentage sometimes goes to 100 in some hiring managers, to about 10, 20% in some recruiters. But it is there. Like Susan said early on, it's not something we can avoid. We can completely wipe out from the process. This is where tools need to be in place for that, right? This is where AI would come in to fix this problem, as kind of, and there's some ATSs that do this well, around anonymizing the data, removing photos, removing the name,
Right.
removing things around maternity or paternity. Like all of these things is, I think AI should be used for removing the biases, for removing that
Right.
information, because if it's trained on that information, knows what it's capturing, knows what the input is, there should be tools integrated into ATSs and others that allow for that to happen.
I love it. I love that reminder of we can use AI to do these things, right? Like streamline removing certain information. So I think that's a fabulous reminder. And I think, again, if we go back to our previous conversation, we're going to combine the technology and human, then the
Right.
human element of this becomes always make sure there is a panel of very diverse people making decisions, right? This we know already for years of practice. But I do think it's being also mindful that they all come in with their own biases. So I'm a big fan of how do we also make sure, again, we talk about the people they will be managing, for example, or just cross-functional, right? Instead of just getting the same functional panels. So I think a great way is just to combine the two. How do you use your tools better, and how do you drive a bit more different type of human participation to calibrate that?
Cool. Uh, I think one more about biases. If traditional CVs or resumes are biased, how should we prepare for this change? What's the little steps that we can take?
I mean, I go back to actually how do we also present ourselves differently? If we now don't think about CVs from a employer point of view, but think about CVs as a talent point of view, to
Right.
prepare for the changes also, the reality is how do you stand out? Right? If right now everyone is throwing perfect CVs around because it's AI, how you actually need to stand out, right?
Right.
So again, the
Right.
little steps, how do you showcase your differentiation through your experience? Like I said, I think again, portfolio kind of base, be much more, if you're not portfolio, it's just be much more thoughtful in your application, right? Again, AI, Google is an amazing thing. So how do you research, right? Research, I've received applicants that stand out because they say, hey, I've just actually looked at your last 3 months consumer feedback, and I saw these three things, and I'm applying for the consumer, customer
Right.
service role, and this is how I would deal with those three. Bam! I won't even care about your CV, right? So
Right.
I think if we take another perspective of if you're a talent to stand out, I think we really need to think about from that point of view as well. How do we present ourselves in a more a holistic? And again, video is great, right? People that sense video typically actually do get a much higher potential to be invited. Actually, if anything, I would invite them just for the effort. Right now, you don't even get that so much. People are
Right.
afraid. So if anyone sends me a video, there's 23 people. So if I get 23 videos, if people send me a video, make an effort, I actually will always meet them just in case, going back to the hidden talent, right? They're showing me something different. Let me talk
Mhm.
to them. And I have done this, what has done beautiful things when I've done this, I'm able to find them roles that may not be the one that we're recruiting for. And that's where the beauty of recruitment truly happens, is finding the talent into the right role. not
Right.
the role.
Right. You want to add to that, Tomo?
No, not much to add to that. I think it's just yeah, I think here we're talking from a candidate perspective. I think as a recruiter, steps that we can take to avoid the bias is just go through unbiases training, provide that training to hiring managers, even if it's not mandatory, but uh, kind of circle around this conversation. I think little by little you start putting this into your own way of working, right? You look at a Asian name and you ignore that, right? You look um, at a female candidate and you don't even give it a second thought. So all of these things is over time you get through this. I think it does get better as you kind of explore other regions and hire for other regions, but it is, even if you just hire for one region, are heavily biases. Just being aware of that bias is quite important. And it's small steps that you can take, but just having that awareness initially and then looking at a photo, say, the person is old. Oh, why did I think that the person is old? And why does that matter to the job that I'm hiring? Remove that thought, and slowly you start removing all of this, that a very lengthy name that you can't pronounce means nothing to the decision you're going to make of can
Right.
they do the job or not.
Cool. Thank you, Susan and Telmo. I just received a notification that the time is up. So I think I just want to say thank you to Telmo and Susan for the inspiring and insightful session. And I'm not talking about the participants, I'm talking about me. I mean, for me personally, this has been a very insightful session, and I'm sure all the participants will feel the same. So I really want to say, send my biggest gratitude to you too. Thank you for sharing your experience and your insights. And I think, yeah, I hope that this would be the first of many talks or many sessions that we will have in the future. And again, thank you, and have a nice day for everyone. Thank you, Tomo, and thank you, Susan.
Thank you for the
Thank you
invite.
so